The bus stop bench is cold, a slab of brushed steel damp with the morning mist. WYRMSCALE watches the commuters line up, their breaths blooming like pale flowers in the gray air. Behind the glass advertisement panel, the world has ceased to be asphalt and urban sprawl. A vertical wall of seawater, immense and impossibly silent, stands where the horizon should be. It is dark, churning with rhythmic pulses of deep, oceanic pressure rising thousands of feet into the overcast sky, motionless and heavy. Salt spray coats the back of the commuters' coats, a fine, crystalline mist that tastes of brine and ancient depths. WYRMSCALE reaches out, fingertips grazing the glass partition. The vibration is low, a subsonic thrum that rattles the teeth and makes the marrow ache. Seaweed, long and thick as anchor ropes, drifts slowly behind the glass, tangled in the currents of a vertical ocean that defies every law of gravity. There is no sound of waves crashing, only the hum of the infinite. A single, massive ripple shudders through the wall of water, and the steel frame of the bus stop begins to groan under the sheer displacement of weight. The pavement cracks, jagged fissures spiderwebbing outward toward the street as the ground tilts toward the encroaching blue expanse. A luxury sedan parked at the curb is lifted from its tires, held in place by the sudden, localized surge of pressure. The reality of the morning commute dissolves into the crushing fluid gravity of the deep. The glass pane shatters not outward, but inward, pulled by the immense vacuum created by the standing wall of water. A deluge of cold, dark liquid washes over the sidewalk, sweeping the bus stop bench into the gutter. Water snakes around the ankles of the standing crowd, cold enough to burn. The traffic signals overhead flicker, shorting out in a shower of sparks as the weight of the ocean begins to push forward, claiming the intersection and drowning the mundane rhythm of the city. WYRMSCALE remains perfectly still, boots planted firmly against the rising tide. The water swirls around her calves, tugging at her hem, yet her expression does not shift from a calm, detached focus. While others scramble toward the higher ground of the subway stairs, she opens her coat to reveal a series of tightly cinched, waterproof pouches strapped against her torso. She adjusts a small, metallic dial on her wrist, her movements precise and rhythmic, ignoring the chaos of the flooding street entirely. With the water now rising to her knees, WYRMSCALE checks the internal pressure gauge mounted to her forearm. She pulls a thermos from her bag, unscrewing the lid to take a measured, deliberate sip of black coffee. The steam rises, vanishing into the damp, salt-heavy air. She watches a discarded newspaper float past, its headlines swirling into an illegible pulp. The panic of the surrounding city is a distant, muffled noise, barely registering against her steady, rhythmic breathing as she waits for the event to stabilize. The surrounding architecture is beginning to buckle, the storefront windows bowing under the hydrostatic pressure of the standing sea. WYRMSCALE turns her gaze toward the tallest skyscraper in the district, watching how the water reacts to the iron structure. It does not crash. It clings, coating the glass in a translucent, living membrane. She marks the way the currents spiral around the support columns, her eyes tracing the geometry of the flow, cataloging the exact density of the anomaly as it settles into the city. From the inner lining of her heavy coat, WYRMSCALE extracts a heavy, reinforced spike, its surface etched with complex, shimmering ley lines. She drives it into the crack in the pavement near her feet, the metal singing with a high-pitched resonance the moment it bites into the concrete. It is not an act of desperation, but an anchor beneath the surface of the street. Hidden sensors hum to life, their buried lights blinking a deep, rhythmic amber in sync with the pulsing wall of water. The amber hum emanating from the pavement is not a spontaneous eruption, but a resonance of a blueprint drafted years ago in a windowless office. WYRMSCALE glances toward the edge of the parking lot, where a monolithic tower stands defiant against the encroaching tide. It wasn't built by the city, but positioned as a lightning rod for the inevitable shift. The foundation of the structure has been vibrating in sympathy with these hidden sensors long before the first drop of brine touched the asphalt. The tower is not merely a piece of architecture, but the keystone of a containment strategy she had meticulously engineered to stabilize the encroaching deed. As the water rises, the structure begins to emit a low-frequency pulse that carves a dry corridor through the inundation. This was never a disaster to be mitigated. It was a localized event to be harnessed. WYRMSCALE watches the clouds swirl around the spire's summit, realizing that the tower was designed to act as a tether for reality itself. Beyond the immediate perimeter, the urban driz is factoring under the relentless pressure of the anomaly. More vehicles are being swept into the surging currents, their occupants screaming as the reality of the commute is permanently erased. WYRMSCALE tightens her grip on the wrist dial, calculating the remaining structural integrity of the parking lot. The tower above the lot is beginning to tilt, its weight shifting toward the epicenter. If the spire collapses now, the containment field will fold inward, crushing everything in the radius. Time is bleeding away with every rhythmic flash of the amber lights beneath her boots. The water levels are rising, and the structural supports of the parking garage are beginning to groan metal, shrieking against the unnatural density of the ocean. WYRMSCALE knows the window for stabilization is closing. She stares up at the tower vanishing into the heavy, charcoal clouds, noting the alignment of the spire's apex. She has less than 3 minutes to lock the frequency before the entire sector is submerged. A secondary, darker current manifests, cutting through the primary surge with predatory intent. This is not the ocean anymore. It is an intrusion from third-party entities that have been tracking her movements since the project's inception. They are emerging from the shifting shadows of the drowned traffic, their forms flickering like damaged film. WYRMSCALE remains motionless, her focus absolute. She recognizes their signature. They are not here to stop the anomaly, but to accelerate the collapse for their own territorial gain. She reaches into her utility pouch and pulls out a small, metallic drive, its surface etched with the same ley lines as the anchor currently vibrating in the concrete. This is the ledger of the event, a physical record of the atmospheric densities and sensor outputs recorded since the initial breach. She wipes the salt spray from the casing. It is not just data. It is the authorization code required to override the tower's automated defenses and prevent the total systemic failure of the sector. WYRMSCALE slots the drive into the interface port located near the base of the anchor. The device pulses with a brilliant, steady blue, confirming the integrity of the encrypted files. The ledger matches the current oscillation of the parking lot perfectly. The data confirms that the tower was indeed raided to initiate this precise catastrophe as a means of resetting the local laws of physics. She verifies the timestamp. Every microsecond of the surge is accounted for in the pre-programmed sequence of the tower's descent. A transmission light on the console flickers, revealing an incoming signal from a remote terminal far outside the city limits. It is a signature she recognizes, belonging to a colleague she believed had been lost during the initial site failure. The screen displays a live feed of another tower, identical in design, now rising from the ruins of a coastal facility. Someone else knows the protocol, and they are already initiating the next phase of the cycle, regardless of the lives trapped in this wreckage. WYRMSCALE stands beneath the rusted canopy of a bus stop, the glass pane etched with graffiti now vibrating in sympathy with the deep, oceanic hum emanating from behind the structure. A wall of dark, churning water stands vertical, defying gravity and logic, held in place by a flickering containment field. Across the street, the colleague steps into view, holding a tablet that pulses with the same sickly luminescence as the spire. They do not speak. The atmospheric pressure makes even a whisper feel like a violent intrusion. WYRMSCALE produces the decrypted drive, its surface cold and etched with the jagged geometry of the override sequence. She taps the glass of the terminal mounted to the bus stop's frame, revealing the internal logs of the sector. The time-stamped flow of the collapse is laid bare, a sequence of deliberate, malicious injections that she mirrors on the screen. The colleague does not flinch as the evidence of their betrayal, the exact coordinates and the hidden packet transfers is mirrored across the glowing, wet monolith before them. The colleague attempts to lock the interface, their fingers dancing over a remote uplink, but WYRMSCALE anticipates the motion. She shifts the frequency of the bus stop's local node, inducing a feedback loop that ripples through the surrounding concrete. The water behind the wall surges, a massive hand of liquid force pressing against the invisible membrane. It is a gamble of raw energy. By forcing the oscillation out of sync, she forces the colleague to choose between sustaining the collapse or losing their own connection to the facility's core. The interface shatters, sending a cascade of white sparks raining onto the cracked pavement. With the link severed, the colleague's own tower, miles away, loses its anchor. The structural stability they had exploited turns against them as the containment field folds inward with a sound like grinding tectonic plates. WYRMSCALE watches as the colleague is pulled toward the collapsing reality they helped create, the very synchronization they used for profit now acting as a tether to the ruin of their own ambition. WYRMSCALE does not celebrate. The cost of the severance is immediate. The local bus stop terminal begins to melt, the heavy heat of the reaction bleeding into her own gloves. She has prevented the total systemic failure of this sector, but the energy required to override the defenses has scorched the surrounding district. As the air stabilizes, she feels the phantom weight of the data she had to purge decades of research, now drifting into the static of the void, never to be recovered by anyone. The silence that follows is heavy, punctuated only by the drip of residual moisture falling from the air. The colleague is gone, folded into the singularity of their own greed, leaving behind nothing but a scorched patch of asphalt. WYRMSCALE remains, her hands trembling as she disconnects the final drive. The wall of water has dissipated into a fine, gray mist that settles over the street, obscuring the horizon. The system is silent, the hum silenced, but the architecture of this city is irrevocably altered. Morning light filters through the mist, illuminating the wreckage of the bus stop. WYRMSCALE begins the work, gathering the scattered components of the terminal, her movements rhythmic and detached. She clears the debris from the bench, brushing away the fine, metallic dust that coats every surface. There is no triumph in the restoration of the grid. There is only the slow, methodical act of clearing the path for the next transit. Something fundamental has shifted in the landscape, a permanent fracture in the sky above. She finds a single photograph in the rubble, its edge curled and burnt, depicting a place that no longer exists outside of her memory. The image is blurred, the faces of those who once stood there lost to the static of the collapse. She tucks it into her coat, knowing that some things are not meant to be retrieved. The bus route will return, the commute will resume, but the silence between the streetlights will always hold the echo of the void that almost consumed the world. WYRMSCALE sets her keys on the scarred laminate table, the metal clicking with a finality that marks the end of the shift. Her daughter reaches out, tracing the map of fine lines around her mother's eyes, a gesture of recognition that bridges the gap left by the weeks of silence. They do not speak of the architecture that fell or the colleagues who dissolved into the ether. Instead, they share a bowl of fruit, the mundane act of peeling an orange grounding them in a reality that refuses to dissolve. The parking lot is a grid of asphalt and forgotten oil stains, but the sky above it is no longer empty. A tower, crystalline and impossibly slender, rises from the gray surface and vanishes into the thick, humid clouds. WYRMSCALE stands by her sedan, checking her watch as the digital display flickers at 7:14 a.m. Her new assignment does not involve managing the collapse of systems, but rather the quiet maintenance of the perimeter, ensuring the structure remains tethered to the ground while it continues its slow, upward migration. The archives of the old firm were purged, reduced to a collection of corrupted sectors that defy recovery. WYRMSCALE pushes the heavy glass door open, entering the archives of the new facility where she now works. A man named Elias waits by the console, his hands steady as he organizes the data streams that survived the transition. There is no triumph in their shared silence, only the acknowledgement that their previous ambitions were mere ghosts, and that the work they perform now is small, necessary, and entirely devoid of grand illusions. Rain begins to fall, tapping against the windshield of the parked car in a rhythmic, indifferent cadence. WYRMSCALE watches the drops gather, distorting the world outside into a series of fluid, shifting shapes. The tower above continues its ascent, a needle stitching the earth to the atmosphere. It is a monument to a transition that no one asked for, standing as a testament to the fact that when the foundation of the world is shaken, the only thing left to do is observe the way the light catches the debris. The engine turns over, a low vibration that travels through the chassis and settles into her bones. WYRMSCALE drives past the parking lot, the tower behind her appearing to shrink as the distance grows, though its peak remains perpetually shrouded in the clouds. There is no map for where the structure ends or what it intends to anchor. She navigates the exit ramp, moving toward the city lights that bloom like embers in the dusk, leaving the void behind as a quiet, settled memory in the cooling air.